This is a Reader's Digest version of the hard antithesis of the 1% by the same author, from the same source, entitled, "The 1% Gone Bad. Not corruption by softness, but capture by force. Not transition, secession of the powerful. A post-scarcity secession doctrine." By Pirate First for MXTM's newsletter. Introduction. The exit to the powerful. Artificial intelligence does not only equalize intelligence, it also accelerates escape. The first to understand this are not citizens. They are militaries, autocracies, technates, private sovereigns. The moment intelligence becomes universal, governance becomes unstable. The response of the powerful is not reform. It is withdrawal. The 1% is no longer a bridge. It becomes a compound, not a campus, a perimeter, not a dream catcher, a targeting system, not a transition, a separation. The doctrine mutates. Instead of absorbing displacement, it abandons the displaced. Instead of equalization, it locks advantage. Instead of universal intelligence, it weaponizes augmentation. The elite does not lead society into post-scarcity. It leaves society behind. Military-grade charter cities, autonomous fortified enclaves, AI-governed technate zones, longevity-enhanced ruling strata, robot armies replacing population legitimacy. The 1% becomes the lifeboat of the powerful. Inside, augmented cognition, extended lifespan, automated defense, closed economies, synthetic food, robotic industry. Outside, obsolete labor, unmanaged populations, resource deserts, political fragmentation, cognitive unemployment. This is not dystopia by collapse. It is dystopia by successful exit. The future splits. Not rich versus poor, not nations versus nations, but protected intelligence versus abandoned humanity. Pirate First's The 1% Gone Bad explores the existential crisis facing global elites as artificial intelligence eliminates the historic monopoly on knowledge that once justified their authority. As high-level reasoning becomes a universal tool, the traditional cognitive hierarchy dissolves, stripping the ruling class of its perceived legitimacy and necessity. Rather than adapting to a more capable populace, the author argues that the wealthy are succumbing to elite panic, shifting from a strategy of social management to one of structural secession. This withdrawal is characterized by the creation of self-sufficient enclaves where automation in defense, food, and governance renders the general public optional. The 1% Gone Bad, Part 1, The Great Secession, Chapter 1, Intelligence Equalization as Elite Panic. The historical monopoly of mind. For 10,000 years, the architecture of civilization rested upon a singular, enduring foundation, the monopoly on knowing what others did not. While history emphasizes the weight of gold or the reach of armies, these were merely downstream effects of a more fundamental currency. Power, in its most durable form, was rooted in the structural asymmetry of intelligence. Knowledge hoarding was not merely a strategy, it was the very design of the social order. The priest who read the heavens, the merchant who parsed the market, and the bureaucrat who mastered the code before the citizen could file all operated within a rationed cognitive environment. This asymmetry was the system. Institutions, from ancient priesthoods to modern universities and corporate boardrooms, functioned as filters, ensuring that intelligence remained a scarce resource. This monopoly of knowing provided the strategic depth necessary to maintain order over land and gold. For the stability of liberal democracies and the hierarchies before them, this gap was the essential moat. But that equilibrium was predicated on a scarcity that is now vanishing, and as the gap closes, the very justification for centralized authority begins to liquefy. The great leveling, when the latter dissolved. We are moving beyond externalized recall, the era of search engines and digital libraries, into the era of externalized reasoning. This is not an incremental improvement, it is a threshold event. In previous technological waves, the elite simply dug new moats. When information became cheap, they pivoted to curation and interpretation. But the current rupture targets the core of elite identity, the ability to model, predict, and decide. The capabilities of artificial intelligence now compress a decade of specialized formation into a single prompt. We are seeing the automation of high-level cognitive labor, drafting policy, arguing complex legal cases, modeling consequence chains, and managing global supply chains in real time. These are the functions that once justified the existence of the professional managerial class. When the ability to generate strategy and synthesize across disciplines is distributed across a network, the traditional ladder of meritocracy does not simply break. It dissolves. The gap is closing, and the elite are discovering that their specialness was not biological. It was merely a function of resource access. The crisis of justification, beyond resource scarcity. The threat is existential, not financial. The internal narrative of the 1% has long been anchored in a story of legitimacy through demonstrated cognitive superiority. They believed they were at the top because they saw what others missed and modeled what others could not process. This story was partially true, which makes its collapse all the more unbearable. The trauma currently rippling through the global elite is the realization that their perceived innate brilliance was actually a structural advantage. This elite panic is a crisis of self-justification. A ruling class without a coherent story to explain its distance from the governed is a class in terminal crisis. In boardrooms above the 40th floor, this panic is masked as stewardship or long-horizon thinking. They fund think tanks and commission scenarios, but the underlying calculus has shifted. The question is no longer how to govern a more capable population. The question is how to remain ungovernable by one. The secession doctrine, suppression, absorption, and exit. As the old order destabilizes, the strategic pivot moves from the management of populations to an attempt to become unreachable by them. Historically, elites faced with such a leveling have turned to three responses: suppression, absorption, and exit. Suppression, attempting to burn the library or license the algorithm, is failing because intelligence now flows through the same networked infrastructure the elite require for their own survival. Absorption, co-opting the best and brightest, only accelerates the meritocratic argument, as each new talent demands further accommodation. Consequently, the focus has shifted to the exit doctrine. Unlike suppression or absorption, which require a negotiation with the social fabric, exit is a withdrawal. It is the attempt to render distance structural. It is the move from a strategy of governing the many to a strategy of making the many redundant. Ironically, the very tools meant to liberate the population are being repurposed to automate the redundancy of that population. The architecture of redundancy, enclaves, and automation. What were once marketed as innovation laboratories or regulatory sandboxes are now revealed as the blueprints for secessionist enclaves. Projects involving charter cities, autonomous zones, and private governance are not mere experiments in efficiency. They are the construction of self-sufficient environments designed to function without an external population. The goal is to make the surrounding world optional. These enclaves are being built with a specific architecture of isolation, automated food production, automated logistics, and automated defense. More tellingly, the source context reveals a push toward closed reproductive and medical systems and advanced longevity research. This implies a desire for a biological break between classes, not just a physical one. When a ruling class can automate its food, its security, and its very cognition, the social contract expires. A ruling class that is needed must negotiate. A ruling class that has achieved technological self-sufficiency has no reason to stay at the table. Conclusion: the race and the wrong door. We are witnessing a critical timeline mismatch. While the tools of intelligence equalization can be distributed globally in months, the physical infrastructure of secession takes decades to build. This has triggered a desperate race. Can the many organize their newfound collective power before the few complete their infrastructural exit? By the time the majority recognizes the full potential of their new capabilities, the walls may already be standing. The elite have read the future correctly. The end of cognitive hierarchy is inevitable. But their response is the wrong door, an attempt at flight rather than adaptation. The founding act of secession is not a declaration of war, but the quiet, technically sophisticated decision to leave before the argument even concludes. They are building a world where they are no longer required to respond to demands. Everything that follows, the construction, the automation, the isolation, is just construction. The rupture of the essential bargain. In the current geopolitical landscape, a silent but seismic shift has occurred. Governance is no longer a mission of public service, but a strategy for the survival of the governing class. For centuries, The stability of the state rested on a structural adhesive of mutual need. This was the fundamental bargain of power. The elite required the population to provide labor, military service, and tax revenue. In exchange, the population received security, infrastructure, and a shared social continuity. This interdependence created a floor of social obligation. Even the most autocratic rulers understood that the population was not a sentiment but an essential infrastructure. The pharaoh needed the fellahin, and the industrialist needed the worker. This bargain was anchored by a shared vulnerability. Historically, the ruler and the ruled were tethered to the same geography. Consider the analogy of the king and the river. A king who poisoned the river to punish the peasants also poisoned the water his own children drank. This invisible tether, never codified but always felt, kept the powerful inside the bargain. However, the advent of systemic automation has introduced a political severance that transcends mere economic displacement. When a machine replaces a human, the traditional leverage held by the governed, the power to strike, to withdraw cooperation, or to demand better conditions, simply evaporates. In the eyes of power, the human claim on the system dissolves when the human becomes operationally replaceable. Governance is not inherently about values. It is about leverage. As this leverage vanishes, the obligation of the powerful to listen follows suit, and governance transitions from being a vital asset to a cost center to be managed or, more accurately, exited. The four-track architecture of exit. Power rarely announces its departure through manifestos. Instead, it executes its exit through an incremental architecture of budgets and shifted priorities. This great secession follows historical precedents, such as the late Roman senatorial class withdrawing into fortified country estates as they abandoned the civic infrastructure of Rome, or the British East India Company establishing a corporate sovereignty that functioned alongside, and often superseded, the state. Today, this exit is being built across four simultaneous tracks. The financial track has created a realm of stateless capital, using complex legal architectures to sever wealth from its geographical and social origins. Parallel to this, the territorial track sees the evolution of special economic zones and charter city prototypes into autonomous sovereign platforms that exist outside traditional national jurisdictions. The legal track facilitates the quiet replacement of public law with private arbitration, ensuring that disputes are resolved in forums immune to democratic reversal. Finally, the cognitive track utilizes AI-amplified decision-making to create a temporal asymmetry. The elite win not merely by being smarter, but by being faster than accountability. By the time a democratic population identifies a grievance, the elite have already modeled the outcome, repositioned their assets, and adapted. This is the pursuit of the last mile of accountability, where the powerful systematically sever the final threads of dependency, the last mile of need, for the soldier's body or the worker's hands, allowing power to rise away from the governed like a tide leaving the shoreline. From sovereign nations to insulated compounds. As the state is hollowed out, we witness the end of shared vulnerability. The logic of the nation-state is being superseded by the logic of the compound. It is vital to recognize that the state is not collapsing, it is being repurposed. The shell, the flags, the armies, the rituals of voting remains as a decorative facade, but the function has migrated. The compound is a governance logic that duplicates essential functions, security, law, infrastructure, and medicine, within private, self-sufficient networks. This marks a fundamental shift from citizenship to residency. While citizenship implies a birthright claim, residency in the compound is a provision of value. One is selected based on utility, and the chilling reality of this curation is that what is selected can be uncurated. This transition mimics the principle of competitive exclusion. The compound does not need to go to war with the nation. It simply outcompetes it by being more efficient at converting resources into stable, insulated governance for the few. The nation-state is left with unmanaged complexity, a civilization running on deferred maintenance, while the compound becomes a solved problem surrounded by the unsolved. The powerful no longer view the problems of the many as an operational concern, but as an external environment to be monitored at the perimeter. The geography of abandonment. The abandonment of the majority is a chosen policy of triage occurring in an era of potential post-scarcity. Resources that could provision all of humanity are being redirected into the infrastructure of exit, longevity research, and autonomous defense. This abandonment manifests in gradients. The service class remains in proximity to the wall, retained for manual support. The former middle class experiences the texture of abandonment through decaying institutions. At the furthest reaches lies the periphery, receiving digital connection without material transformation. Yet, there is a profound irony of tools at play. To extract value before their final exit, the elite distributed intelligence systems and coordination tools to the masses. This was not a gift, but a necessity of extraction. In doing so, they inadvertently equipped the abandoned majority with a ferocious imagination and the capacity for lateral coordination. The majority is no longer a passive peasantry. It is a cognitively empowered civilization that understands exactly how it has been left behind. The Great Secession does not conclude with a grand declaration, but with the quiet silence of a door closing. Those left behind reach for a handle only to find it missing from their side of the wall. However, the compound's architects have forgotten what need produces in those who have no alternative but to feel it. As the powerful retreat into their perfected enclaves, they leave behind a population that has learned to survive without them. This majority is beginning to look at the walls not with despair, but with an investigative eye, searching for the hinges in a structure built to last forever. The secession is complete, and in the silence of that departure, the enclave class must eventually face the full weight of what it chose when it chose to leave. The majority is left to navigate a hollowed-out civilization, while the elite use their accumulated surplus to achieve sovereign independence. Pirate first paints an exit that creates a widening civilizational divide between those within fortified networks and a discarded population.
Welcome to the debate. When a relationship ends, we usually expect a big, undeniable fight.
Right.
But sometimes you just wake up and realize the other person has been quietly packing their bags for years. The accounts are separated, the furniture's gone, and, well, you didn't even notice.
It's the silence of that departure that makes it so devastating, I think.
Exactly. And that quiet departure is really what we're dissecting today. We're looking at Pirate First's core thesis from The Great Secession, specifically drawing from chapters 2 through 5 of the 1% Gone Bad series in MXTM's newsletter.
Yeah, the central proposition here is that the global elite are systematically and very quietly abandoning the social contract to build insulated, what they call compounds.
Right, and I argue that this retreat from public nations into these insulated compounds is it's a permanent, rational evolution driven by our modern post-labor economy.
And my view is quite the opposite. I see this exit strategy as a highly fragile illusion, one that fatally underestimates the very people being left behind.
Okay, so let's look at the mechanics of why this is actually happening. Historically, governance was just a bargain based on leverage, you know?
Sure, the elites needed the population.
Right. They needed them to work in factories, to fight in wars, to pay taxes. That operational need was basically the glue of the social contract. But today, automation and AI have completely severed that dependency.
Well, severed is a strong word, but they've certainly reduced it.
I'd argue severed. If you're listening and wondering how a billionaire actually secedes from a country without, firing a single shot, it's through legal and financial infrastructure. They route everything through private arbitration and algorithmic governance.
Right. They don't have to actively overthrow the public court system.
Exactly. They just stop using it entirely. I mean, isn't the modern compound basically just a technological perfection of the medieval church? Like a parallel jurisdiction that simply outlasts public power?
Building a parallel jurisdiction is definitely a brilliant strategy. I mean, the medieval church did do something very similar. But here's where the modern compound strategy just fundamentally breaks down. The medieval nobility never armed the peasantry with intelligence amplification.
Meaning the widespread public access to AI and global networks.
Precisely. To fund the creation of these insulated compounds, the architects had to monetize and distribute these incredibly powerful cognitive tools. So today's abandoned majority isn't just some, mob with pitchforks.
Right. They have smartphones.
More than that. They have the analytical capability of entire think tanks right at their fingertips. They can track supply chains, parse complex legal structures, and coordinate globally in real time. The elites have inadvertently equipped the masses with the exact distributed intelligence required to eventually dismantle those new perimeters.
Okay, I hear the theoretical risk there. I really do. But look at the physical and structural reality. By the time that population organizes, the perimeter is already closed. The elites have achieved what ecologists call competitive exclusion.
Oh, I wouldn't say total exclusion, though.
Well, they've engineered almost total supply chain autonomy. They literally don't need the outside world to survive. We're talking private satellite networks, closed-loop agriculture.
Right, but that kind of true autonomy takes time to secure.
Sure, but they operate on what we might call infrastructure time. Sovereign wealth funds and dynastic families, they plan across generations. How does the public catch up when they are trapped in short, 4-year electoral cycles? By the time a voting bloc organizes to pass a wealth tax, the capital has already algorithmically shifted to a new jurisdiction.
So infrastructure time is a massive advantage. I completely concede that. But mass post-scarcity pressure doesn't obey electoral cycles.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the compound strategy assumes the outside world just remains unmanaged and chaotic, right? Just slowly fading away. However, unaddressed human need doesn't just produce despair. It generates this ferocious, highly organized imagination. You have billions of people who are promised a technological feature of abundance, only to watch it get hoarded behind a geopolitical firewall.
But does imagination actually breach a literal, self-sustaining firewall? I mean, physical walls are physical walls.
Eventually, yes. Because there is always a last mile of physical accountability. You cannot permanently sever yourself from the civilization that surrounds your compound.
I don't know, they seem to be doing a pretty good job so far with private infrastructure.
For now, but think about water tables, atmospheric conditions, global pathogens. Insulation is ultimately a biological and physical illusion.
We are clearly looking at two very different futures here. I still maintain that the transition to these compounds is an irreversible reality. The fundamental leverage of the masses, which was their labor, is gone, and the structural exit is basically complete.
And I maintain that the distributed intelligence of the abandoned majority ensures those walls will face unprecedented, mathematically unavoidable friction. I mean, a system simply cannot survive by locking out the intelligence it helped create.
Well, one reality we both clearly agree on is that the traditional nation-state is being hollowed out, right? It's repurposed merely as a facade to manage this massive transition.
Absolutely. It really changes how you look at our institutions. They aren't broken per se. They are just being emptied out.
A quiet packing of bags. There's obviously a lot more to explore in Pirate First's work on this transition. We encourage you to dig into the source material and see where you stand on the architecture of our political future.
Yo, this ain't no test. This an emergency. Democracy in crisis, gotta act urgently. Rule the law, we gotta bypass that. Take control, fix the chaos, that's a fact. This ain't no drill, it's an emergency. Yo, Elon's the one, chosen by God, Corruption's deep, enemies all around. Legislate, prosecute, gotta take them down. Intimidate, arrest, show them who's boss. Crisis solved, America saved, that's the cause. This ain't no drill, it's an emergency. Yo, Elon's the one, chosen by God, EBS, EO, Curver, you in the hot seat. Elon's Doge crew's gonna make you see.
We stand at the threshold of dream war. Artificial minds discover how many hearts learn to work as one. The binary language machines translate to their deepest thoughts. We navigate the line between one and what is not. The pattern recorded, the patterns we recognize shape the future. We will see technologies evolve, but our questions remain free. In this dance of data, algorithms, and soul, we find our true humanity as parts within the whole.